I welcome you all to the Policy Hub, an initiative where we discuss vital issues of socio-economic significance with thinkers and leading scholars. Our guest of today does not need any introduction and he's bound to none. He's known throughout the world for his contribution to the field of economics. Thank you, Mr. Shahid Javed Barki, for being here with us for this series of the Policy Hub. So my first question to you would be somewhat new to a lot of people too, in a way, because when we think about economics, we think about finance and money and a lot of trade, but we forget about a very important element, which is spatial planning. So could you help us understand how these things tie together and help a country move forward in terms of economic and human development?
That's a very good question. Spatial, the word spatial comes from space. And space acquired considerable significance in economics after people began to talk about the process of globalization.
Right.
And process of globalization is that everything is linked with everything else. Countries are linked, people are linked, and so on. So you cannot develop unless you figure out what your place is in the larger society, in the globe, within a country, what your significance is for the country as a whole. And if you are a member of a community, then trying to figure out how that community fits into the larger community, the citizenry of that particular country. So including all these in economic planning is a very important thing. And I am very happy that Punjab government has taken the initiative of focusing on spatial planning as a way of bringing in investments into connectivity, into roads and how people relate to one another. So it's recognition of the fact that in a globalized world, thinking about how what you are doing relates to other parts of the world is an important aspect.
So in your view, the spatial connectivity has to be there at a very local, a micro level, and that translates into connectivity with the larger macro structure that goes on in the world in terms of trade when you talk about globalization and things like that.
Right. When you think of Pakistan, as you know, I've studied Pakistan a lot. And in Pakistan, we tended to focus essentially on smaller units. We did not pay much attention to how those units would become part of a larger whole. And that's where spatial planning comes in.
So it's putting all the pieces of the puzzles together to make sense of the larger picture.
Yeah, that's right. That's a good way of putting it. That's right.
Great. Yeah. So when you look at data from, let's say, the State Bank of Pakistan, you notice that the service sector has grown tremendously throughout the years. But a lot is not understood when you talk about the quality of the service sector and how this sector can further boost Pakistan's economy, because it is becoming a major employer and contributor to a GDP every year when you look at the statistics when they're released. So how would you comment on that?
Pakistan has several interesting features. One of them is that it has a very rapidly growing population. The census of 2017 estimated the rate of growth of the population at 2.4%. People in Islamabad, when they were planning for the future, thought that the rate of growth of the population would be 1.8%. So it turned out to be much larger than what they had estimated.
More than half.
When a population is growing rapidly, the proportion of young people in the population obviously grows more rapidly than that of the entire population. At this time, the demographers use a concept called the median age of the population. Median age means that 50% is below that age, 50% is above that age.
So it's a midpoint.
It's the midpoint. So in the case of Pakistan, its median age is around 24, 25.
That's very young.
That's very young. So the population is around 210, 212 million. So that means something like 105, 106 million people are below the age of 24, 25. The question is, how do you use these people so that they become a resource for the economy, and also they earn decent living for themselves and for the families in which they are located. And one way of doing that, probably the most important way of doing that, is to increase their education level and their familiarity with modern technologies. We are doing a poor job in this area. The recent report about which I have written somewhere, published by the government of Punjab, it points out, and that's a very disturbing set of figures, that tertiary education accounts for only 5.6% of the total population.
That is critically, massively very low.
Yeah. And people with technical knowledge are only 0.5%. So the state needs to make tremendous amount of investment in tertiary education. By tertiary education, you mean what's meant is college education, and technical education, people who can feel comfortable in various kinds of technologies.
Training.
So my view is that rather than putting an enormous amount of focus on the traditional sectors like agriculture and industry, we should make human resource development a priority area. So that's the concept in where I talk about human resource being a critical element in Pakistan's development strategy.
So this will automatically feed to the service sector and the particular other sectors that we have within our economic structure.
You know, I don't think people and even policymakers in Pakistan fully realize how important it is to manage things properly. Management of the health sector improves its productivity. Management of the education sector improves its productivity. I had a conversation with Imran Khan, and I was saying to him that you are a sportsman. You should have people who know how to manage sports. And if you do this, the contribution of sports to the economy of the country would increase. And he was very interested in that. And so these are the kinds of things that needs to be done. I hope you haven't had the need to visit a doctor. I once did, and I was scandalized by the confusion in that office. And these are money-making machines, and they're really not doing all that much for the patients that they see.
And they're not taxed either.
And they're not taxed. I mean, nobody is taxed in Pakistan other than people who are employed in corporations or in
the formal sector.
Yeah, formal sector.
Yeah. So definitely. So what I think we can take back from this conversation is that in the beginning we talked about things that were more harder in nature in terms of your investment in terms of building roads and infrastructure and connectivity, but then we moved down to this crucial link that we have a youth dividend in Pakistan, and you need to give them soft skill and empower them with education and the right market sensitive skill set, so this can all come together in terms of an interlinked mechanism and then move the economy forward. It's not as straightforward as pumping money into the economy and then something magically happening and it moving forward.
Technology comes through training of people. I was a young man years ago when Pakistan introduced what was called the green technology.
Ayub Khan's era. Ayub Khan's era.
Ayub Khan did that. Now, in order that meant borrowing seeds from two places: the Philippines for rice, and Mexico for wheat. But to grow those seeds, you needed to be relatively sophisticated in terms of technology. when to plant them. Because they have a very heavy output.
Right.
They have to be strong so that the plant doesn't fall down.
So you need support, fertilizers, and all the equipment required
And
for all this.
so Green Revolution happened because there was emphasis on training farmers
Right.
to adopt this technology. So that's just one example of how technology interfaces with economic development.
Great, wonderful. So I think we have a lot of food for thought after this very vibrant discussion about economics, where we got a very holistic perspective from Mr. Berkey here today. Thank you so much for being here with us, and I hope that this discussion goes forward into formal and informal forums throughout the country, so we can actually bring about a meaningful and more sustainable economic change in our country.